Welcome to the 7th presentation, where we're looking at the insights from the book of Ezekiel. I've entitled this Judgment and Grace. Let's just look back for a moment or two at where we've been. Ezekiel was shown by God that a final sacking of Jerusalem and a further deportation of exiles was coming soon. He was with exiles in Babylon, but they simply didn't believe this would happen. They thought God would just simply step in, rescue the nation, and drive out the enemy. Wasn't going to happen. God showed Ezekiel what was going to happen. He showed the inevitability of the final destruction of Jerusalem, the temple, and the whole structure of the Judean society. And he showed Ezekiel the way false prophets were spreading wrong ideas and misleading the people. He spent quite a bit of time on this, and let's just look back at the key points. There's a central blockage with all prophecy, and it comes in two linked issues. Leaders, or the people wanting God's guidance, they come seeking spiritual direction, but they only want to hear what they want to hear. They've already made up in their mind what they want. They know what's best. And so they only want to hear what they want to hear. Now, the temptation in that situation is people who are called to speak the mind of God. They're tempted to offer the people what fits in with what they want. And that was happening, and it is always happening, and it's still happening today. You see, that's a fundamental principle. God cannot make himself known to people who choose to center their lives on something else. We've made up our mind. We've decided. God just can't break through to people like ourselves who do that. And the sad thing is, when we're not really open to what God is saying, God has to say, okay, have it your own way, but you live with the consequences. If you center your lives on something else, what you want, in some form or guise, well, you've got to live with the outcomes. That's idolatry. Living with someone else or something else at the center of our thinking. And what does God think of all that? Isaiah was shown this. When any of the Israelites or any foreigner residing in Israel separate themselves from me and set up idols in their hearts and put a wicked stumbling block before their faces. In other words, they've made up their mind what are the priorities in their life, and they're going to pursue it. They know what they want. And then go to a prophet to inquire of me. I, the Lord, will answer them myself. I will set my face against them. God can't break through when we've already made up our minds. And we end up being an example and a byword. We lose out, removed from God's people. And that's the key little sentence. We can't manipulate God. And this is a real danger. It was a danger, and it was happening in the days of Ezekiel. It's happened down through history, and it's happening today. We decide what the priorities are. We form our little committees. We rubber stamp it with a prayer. The sovereign Lord God is not open to human manipulation. We've got to scrub out ourselves and say, Lord, what do you really want? Please speak and break through. Then prophets can reveal it to us. Prophecy can be a dangerous business. We need it today. We've always needed it. That's the definition of what a prophet actually does. They're speaking the mind of God into a specific situation. They don't choose what they're going to say, and they don't choose to whom it's going to be said. Terrible confusion. Prophet is not a preacher, not a teacher, and certainly not a celestial fortune teller. And some of the ways that in some Christian groups we're looking at prophecy today, it's closer to the last thing. Fortune telling the future. If you look at the Old Testament prophets, they often didn't want to be prophets. I'm not surprised. If you speak the mind of God into a specific situation to people that God chooses for you, you're going to face opposition and hardship. Ezekiel faced it, so did Jeremiah before him, so did Isaiah before him, and so did all the other prophets. It's a tough job, because that's the danger. And we've got to examine our hearts. We've got to pray this through in our groups. Are we only wanting to hear what we want to hear, confirming what we've already decided? And if God calls you to be a prophet, oh, beware of that. But it's tough to stand against it, as Ezekiel found. Very tough. The way to look at it, I suggested a simple way forward. Just when we look at a prophecy throughout the Bible, when was it spoken? Where was it spoken? To whom was it spoken? Why was it spoken? And then ask the question, how would the original hearers have got it? Now the Bible also gives a test specifically for prophecy. Prophecies are speaking the mind of God into a specific situation. Therefore there is fulfillment. The prophet is saying, if you continue on doing this and that, the following will happen. Does it happen? That's the evidence of true prophecy. You see, if we go through that simple procedure, we can actually find out what it means for us today. But if we start and look at prophecies in the Bible and have already decided what they mean, and we make them fit into our theologies, then we're in real danger. Prophecy can be dangerous, and yet it's powerfully useful. One of God's ways of speaking to us. Now let's move on with that background in mind. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, if a country sins against me by being unfaithful, and I stretch out my hand against it to cut off its food supply, and send famine upon it, and kill its people and their animals, even if these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they could only save themselves by their righteousness, declares the sovereign Lord. Now we've got to remember, this is written what we call a Hebraism. It sees God behind everything. God does not send disasters. But when we go in certain directions, disasters are inevitable. Actions have consequences. Or if I send wild beasts throughout that country and they leave it childless and it becomes desolate and no one can pass through it because of the beasts, as surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, even if these three men were in it, they could not save their own sons and daughters. They alone would be saved, but the land would be desolate. Or I bring a sword against that country and say, let the sword pass through the land, and I kill its people and their animals. Surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, even if these three men were in it, they could not save their own sons or daughters. They alone would be saved. Or if I send a plague into that land and pour out my wrath on it through the bloodshed, killing its people and their animals, as surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, even if Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, they could save neither son nor daughter. They would save only themselves by their righteousness. When we pursue certain actions, there are inevitable consequences. They may involve famine. They may involve the ravaging of wild beasts in a land. They may involve warfare or plague. But there's a phrase that keeps repeating itself. Saved just means rescued. Don't spiritualize it away. It's an illustration of reality. Righteousness, people who set their minds on doing God's ways. We are each responsible. That's the point that God is making to Ezekiel. You cannot live on the spiritual heritage of your forebears. Why Noah, Daniel, and Job? That has puzzled many people. Noah goes away back in history. So does Job. And yet Daniel was alive and active at this time, working in the court of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. What was common about these three? And it was that when we look at them, they were not perfect, they were not sinless, but they were all characterized by righteousness. They had all committed to living in line with what God wanted. And that's all that God asks for us, to respond to Him. Not deciding our own agenda, going our own way, doing our own thing for what pleases us. Because when we live in line with what God wants, we get the best from life by far. It goes on, for this is what the sovereign Lord says. How much worse will it be when I send against Jerusalem my 4 dreadful judgments? He summarizes them. Sword, famine, wild beasts, and plague, to kill its men and their animals. Yet there will be some survivors, sons and daughters who will be brought out of it. They will come to you, and when you see their conduct and their actions, you will be consoled regarding the disaster I brought on Jerusalem. Every disaster I brought on it, you will be consoled when you see their conduct and their actions, for you know that I have done nothing in it without cause, declares the sovereign Lord. Again, we've got to remember, in Hebraism, they saw God behind everything. There are good people, people who are living for righteousness, seeking to live their lives God's ways, hidden away in societies. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, how is the wood of a vine different from that of a branch from any of the trees in the forest? Is wood ever taken from it to make anything useful? Do they make pegs from it to hang things on? And after it is thrown in the fire as fuel, and the fire burns both ends and chars the middle? Is it then useful for anything? If it is not useful for anything when it was whole, how much less can it be made into something useful when the fire has burned it and it is charred? Therefore this is what the sovereign Lord says. As I have given the wood of the vine among the trees of the forest as fuel for the fire, so I will treat the people living in Jerusalem. I will set my face against them. Though they have come out of the fire will yet consume them. And when I set my face against them, you will know that I am the Lord. I will make the land desolate, because they have been unfaithful, declares the sovereign Lord. The people of Judah, Jerusalem, had thumbed their nose at God and gone their own way. They'd kept their ritualistic religion going, but they'd lost the Lord of glory. They were doing their own thing, going their own way selfishly for what they wanted. Actions have consequences. They had moved away from the umbrella of God's protection. The land simply fell apart. It was corrupted from top to bottom. It wasn't strong enough as a society to withstand any onslaught. And the Babylonians in due time just walked straight through it, flattened it, and razed Jerusalem to the ground. The picture there, and it's a picture, it's a story. Sword, famine, wild beasts, and plague, the things that people feared in those days. Well, let's look at this bit about the vine. Son of man, how is the wood of a vine different from that of a branch, from any of the trees in the forest? Now, if you look at the original language of this, the language always relates to an object's or a person's fate or destiny. When it's looking at the word different, it means different from different purpose, different use. Nothing to do with quality, but a difference in purpose. Now, you can't tell from the English, but from the original language, that's what it's conveying in the question. Now, that leads to something quite simple. Vines are designed to grow good grapes. You don't grow vines in order to use the wood of the little bush to construct things. The wood is useless for that. Use the wood from a forest for that, for construction purposes. No, vines are designed to grow good grapes. The people of God were designed, brought into being by God in Jerusalem, to live quality lives and make an impact on the world around and draw others to God. That's their purpose. That's why the people of God exist today. That's our only reason for existence. To live quality lives, lives of righteousness, where we're committed to seeking the ways of God. And that's life at its best. And because of that, we're making an impact in how we treat other people, what we do, how we treat each other. We make an impact and we communicate Jesus to those around by the way we live. That's our purpose. But if we don't do it, we don't live these quality lives, and we don't bring positive influence in those around, there's no point in us being there. If you like, we've signed our own death warrant. We've moved away from the protection of God's umbrella. We'll be wiped out. And Ezekiel is making that point to his hearers. God was speaking through Ezekiel. The purpose of the people of Judah was to live for God and make God known by the quality of their living. And they had failed completely, and God had been patient for centuries with them. But they kept on failing, and it just got worse. Now this leads to some very important key principles. The people of Judah had no right to claim God's protection when they did not live lives showing willing obedience to God. Their leaders and their prophets said, oh, no, we're the people of God. We're God's favourites. God will come and he'll save the temple, he'll save Jerusalem, he'll wipe the Babylonians out. But they were living lives that were centred on what they wanted. And there was social evil running rife throughout the society. One of them was the rich kept getting richer, and the majority were struggling to survive. That's one of the outcomes. Now you can see that in the West today. But we've got to think about this. The people of God in the West today, we have no right to claim God's protection. We keep saying the tide will turn. There will be revival around the corner. And prophets have kept prophesying it. It's never happened. Because the conditions are not fulfilled. Are we committed, and I mean committed, to living lives showing willing obedience to God? Or have we already decided how we're going to run our churches and Christian groups? And we're asking God to rubber stamp our procedures and activities. But another important point that Ezekiel was showing, amongst the people of God then, there were those who were righteous. And among the people of God in the West today, there are many wonderful and godly people seeking to live the way of Jesus fully. We can't save the majority. They didn't achieve it in the days of Judah, and we won't achieve it today. And the picture that Ezekiel paints of what was going to happen to the land of Judah and Jerusalem specifically was brutal. Now it was only a few years later when the Babylonian army rampaged its way through Judah, killing wantonly, destroying crops, people groups, buildings, flattening all the pagan temples, smashing the place up, and eventually a siege of Jerusalem. And when they took it, they razed it to the ground, taking everything of value away, flattened it, and they took away many of the leaders into captivity, into exile, deported to Babylon areas. They brought it on themselves, and the Babylonians executed it. Let's remember the words of Jesus. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. And we're speaking about fruit, that's quality living. If you do not remain in me, you're like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. There is a deep word of warning here for us today. Now we're going to move to chapter 16 and read a word of warning here. This is one of the most upsetting, disturbing chapters, difficult chapters in the whole of the Bible. It's uncomfortable to read, almost embarrassing to read. Why did Ezekiel communicate this way? Remember, he'd been warned from the outset that people would not listen. He had to be silent, and he was for a long time. He did it by enacted prophecy, acting things out. But now he's trying to shake them, because he had a terrible problem. The leaders of the exiles, the deportees in Babylon, they were so resistant to hearing what he was saying. They had made up their minds what they wanted. They were not prepared to listen to God through Ezekiel. And so he shocks them in this chapter. Now that's the reason for it. In essence, the picture of an abandoned child, a female child of suspect parentage. The child is rescued and becomes the princess bride, but God, Yahweh, is the groom. Now that may upset us. Remember, it's a story, it's a picture. And it's a picture that occurs in several places in the Old Testament. But here it is at its most vivid. With a wonderful royal wedding. But then this princess goes off to follow a life of prostitution. Her disgraceful conduct. Eventually, there is a restored relationship. Now that's the backcloth behind the storyline. Historically, God reached out to the Abrahamic family, and they were living originally in the area a little bit south of Babylon. Their descendants ended up in Egypt. They were rescued by God under Moses from slavery and exploitation. They had no hope on their own. This people group, which was a right motley crew of ex-slaves, they were given a land. The people in the land were few and far between. There was plenty of space there, resources there. In due time they became a wealthy nation. And when they became a wealthy nation, others around took notice. And they took notice of the God they worshipped, Yahweh. But the nation moved, especially the leadership and the religious leadership. They made power and wealth their God. It started in the great high days of Solomon, when the wealth was at its peak. power and wealth became a god. Oh, that's a terribly powerful temptation. They absorbed religious practices from round about. And that reached its peak in the days of Solomon as well. At the high point of the nation in terms of its impact, so much evil started to erupt, and Solomon was responsible. Pagan shrines were coming up all over the place. Other religions were coming up all over the place. And it's not intolerant to say they're wrong, because these other religions were leading to things that were simply evil. Because most of them were built around fertility cults. And that led to temple prostitution and child sacrifice. And nobody can argue these are good things. Because they abused others. And that went on. There were times when a good leader came and it was pushed down a bit. There were times when it re-erupted again under a weak leader or a poor leader. And the people, particularly the ruling classes, they preferred evil practices and the abuse of others. They preferred that to responding to Yahweh God, who had rescued them originally from slavery and exploitation in Egypt. Now we can see parallels in Western societies today, where that which is causing damage to others is being elevated, and the way of Jesus is being called bigotry. A complete upturning and distortion of reality, objective reality. The story shocks because it's built around the abuse of sexuality. If you look at the first 29 verses, we'll look at some of that in a moment. The people were rescued from slavery. In the story, a powerful man rescues a poor infant girl from hopelessness, inevitable death. But the powerful man is God himself, Yahweh. God gave the nation, the people group, land, security, and a mission for existence, to live for him. God provided this rescued child with wealth, status, and eventually marriage. But marriage to himself, commitment to him. God wanted the responses and obedience of the people group that he'd rescued, because he wanted their lives to show the quality of life that drew other people to him, because he wants the best for all humanity. In the story, all God wanted was our loving response. But the nation, starting in the days of Solomon, it went on, chose to push God to the margins. And in the story, this lady, this princess, chose to run her life her own way. The nation chose to follow other priorities: wealth, power, status, other religions that led to social evil practices. In the story, the princess went down the road of rampant unfaithfulness and prostitution. This story shocks. It challenges. But it's a picture of the reality that was Judah. And there are many elements of it are pictures of the realities that's the West today. It's worth reading the whole chapter. It's a very long chapter, and I'm going to pick out select sections of it to try and get the flavour of it. In the original Hebrew, it's even more blunt and brutal. The English has tried to soften it slightly to allow for our sensibilities today. But get a good modern translation and read it through and capture the flavour of the shocking nature of what Ezekiel was saying. Son of man, confront Jerusalem with their detestable practices and say, "This is what the sovereign Lord says to Jerusalem. Your ancestry and birth were in the land of the Canaanites. Your father was an Amorite and your mother a Hittite. On the day you were born your cord was not cut, nor were you washed with water to make you clean, nor were you rubbed with salt or wrapped in cloths." That was the way of the day. No one looked on you with pity or had compassion enough to do any of these things for you. Rather, you were thrown into the open field, for on that day you were born you were despised. They need to be reminded that the nation started as a people group, exploited and in slavery. I bathed you with water and washed the blood from you and put ointments on you. I clothed you with an embroidered dress and put sandals of fine leather on you. I dressed you in fine linen and covered you with costly garments. I adorned you with jewelry. I put bracelets on your arms and a necklace around your neck. I put a ring on your nose, earrings in your ears, and a beautiful crown on your head. So you were adorned with gold and silver. Your clothes were of fine linen and costly fabric and embroidered cloth. Your food was honey, olive oil, and the finest flour. You became very beautiful and rose to be a queen. And your fame spread among the nations on account of your beauty, because the splendor I had given you made your beauty perfect, declares the sovereign Lord. Now there's a picture of the purposes of God for his people. When we're open to God, listen to him and respond to him, he can make our lives beautiful. Our reputation spreads. We make an impact on those around. It's because God does it for us. But we've got to be willing. It goes on, but you trusted in your beauty and used your fame to become a prostitute. That just shatters our thinking. You lavished your favors on anyone who passed by, and your beauty became his. You took some of your garments to make gaudy high places where you carried out your prostitution. Now that's a picture of what went on in Judah. Religious prostitution. You went to him and he possessed your beauty. You also took the fine jewelry I gave you, the jewelry made of my gold and silver, and you made for yourselves male idols and engaged in prostitution with them. And you took your embroidered clothes to put them on, and you offered my oil and incense before them. And also the food I provided for you, the flour, olive oil, and honey I gave you to eat. You offered us fragrant incense before them. This is what happened, declares the sovereign Lord. Yes, there was pagan religion going on, and people were worshipping what they had made. But there was deeper things in the nation. They were worshipping power, money, possessions, status. And when that happens, the majority of the population lose out. And they suffer. And they're struggling to survive. You took your sons and daughters whom you bore to me and sacrificed them as food to the idols. That's child sacrifice. Was your prostitution not enough? You slaughtered my children and sacrificed them to the idols. In all your detestable practices and your prostitution, you did not remember the days of your youth, when you were naked and bare, kicking about in your blood. Woe, woe to you, declares the sovereign Lord. In addition to all your other wickedness, you built a mound for yourself and made a lofty shrine in every public square. At every street corner you built your lofty shrines and degraded your beauty, spreading your legs with increasing promiscuity to anyone who passed by. That's horrendous, shocking, and it must have jolted his audience. Prostitution is used in the Old Testament from time to time to show unfaithfulness to a life partner. And then that's a metaphor for unfaithfulness to God. That's the picture Ezekiel is building on and developing and shocking his audience. Unfaithfulness to Yahweh, the God of the people of Judah, caused by making anything or anyone else central in life. And today we see exactly that happening, where power, status, money, education, sexuality, I could go on, They have become the gods of the West. And we, the people of God, now a minority, we've got to stand against that lovingly, gently, and we stand against it by showing a better way. We respond to God our Maker, who rescued us in Jesus, and live for Him, the Jesus way, the better way, and point others to Him. That's why God is so much against idolatry. Because when we let anything or anyone become central in our lives, God gets pushed out. Evil comes in, and people get hurt. God is a God of love. People of Judah were doing that. The religious shrines were everywhere. But these were generating unethical behavior. Religions are not all good. There may be good bits here and there in any of them, but other religions can often lead to unethical behavior, and we see it today. Because there are other gods central in living. And the people of Judah were forming alliances with foreign nations in order to protect themselves from attack. They had lost their trust in God, who would protect them and look after them. And they thought that by human organization and planning, they could save themselves. Think about things going on in our churches today, where we think our management, our organization, our systems can save us. They have become our gods, and we're worshipping what we do. Going on, I am filled with fury against you, declares the sovereign Lord, when you do all these things, acting like a brazen prostitute, you adulterous wife. You prefer strangers to your own husband. All prostitutes receive gifts, but you give gifts to all your lovers, bribing them to come to you from everywhere for your illicit favors. Therefore you prostitute, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says, because you poured out your lust and exposed your naked body in your promiscuity with your lovers, and because of all your detestable idols, and because you gave them your children's blood, child sacrifice, therefore I'm going to gather all your lovers, with whom you found pleasure, those you loved as well as those you hated. I will gather them against you from all around, and I will strip you in front of them, and they will see you stark naked. The land of Judah was flattened and destroyed by the Babylonian Empire, and the people groups round about it saw it. And many of them came in afterwards and took the pickings. Because you did not remember the days of your youth, but enraged me with all these things, I will surely bring down your head what you have done, declares the sovereign Lord. Actions have consequences. Your elder sister was Samaria. That was the northern kingdom that broke off and was flattened by the Assyrians. Samaria, who lived to the north of you with her daughters. And your younger sister lived to the south of you with her daughters, was Sodom. That must have shaken them rigid. They despised Sodom, been wiped out in the days of Abraham. But they'd left descendants in the Canaanites. You not only followed their ways and copied their detestable practices, but in all your ways you soon became more depraved than they. Surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, your sister Sodom and your daughter never did what you did and your daughters have done. A comparison that would have hurt them and jolted them. Jealousy we saw before. We've got to watch that word when it's used to describe God. It doesn't quite carry exactly the same meaning in the original language. We tend to use jealousy today as a negative characteristic. In the original word and the idea, it's more positive. It's an expression of God's love. It does not reflect any exploitative need to dominate. It reflects a commitment to the well-being of the other. One person is committed to the well-being of the other. And jealousy aroused when anything can hurt the other. When a legitimate and wholesome relationship is threatened by interference from a third party. God wants the best for us. He's jealous, zealous for that best. And he's angry when anything or anyone stops us getting the best from life. We also got to remember that word vengeance. We looked at it before. The original word is a much more subtle idea than the word that we use in English today, which has changed its meaning and developed a bit to be really quite negative. In the original language, it carries the underpinning idea of God putting things right. Put another way, God allows the consequences from our actions to take place. You want it that way? You won't listen to me? All right, I'll let you have your way, but you live with the consequences. That's the underpinning idea. And when we choose to push God out, we lose His protection and His guidance. That's what had happened to the land of Judah. There were inevitable outcomes. The nation had pushed God to the margins, locked Him up in religious ritual. We're doing that today. Introduced false religion. We're doing that today. And unacceptable moral and social practices were developing, and society was becoming unstable as the rich became richer and the poor went to the wall. Actions have consequences. The point that Ezekiel was making from God was the land would be stripped of all our wealth, our land, our security, and other people groups would see it. Indeed, it would happen at the hands of other people groups. The Babylonians led the onslaught. Other people groups infiltrated afterwards and took some pickings. But all these would go. They were all flattened in the onslaught. Only way to get them out, the people wouldn't listen. But the exile had a purpose. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I will deal with you as you deserve, because you have despised my oath by breaking the covenant. Yet I will remember the covenant I made with you in the days of your youth, and I will establish an everlasting covenant with you. Then you will remember your ways and be ashamed when you receive your sisters, both of those who are older and those than you and those who are younger. I will give them to you as daughters, but not on the basis of any covenant with you. So I'll establish my covenant with you, and you will know that I am the Lord. Then when I have made atonement for you for all you have done, you will remember and be ashamed and never again open your mouth because of your humiliation, declares the Lord. Here is the message of hope at the end. The exile was inevitable. The flattening of Jerusalem and the land was going to happen, and it did a few years later. The prophecy came true. But it had a purpose. It shook the people. And all the false religious activities were destroyed by the Babylonians. Watch that word. We built up all kinds of ideas around it. The word essentially means wiped clean. That word group, the noun of it particularly, is used to speak of the covering of the ark. Another aspect of the word. The ark, inside the ark was the law of God, which we have broken. Above the ark was God. The covering was the bridge between sinful humanity, that's us, and a perfect God, symbolized by the cherubim built into the ark. Difficult to interpret that. But in fact, the word in the original, phrase in the original, means that's what we tend to do. When things go wrong in our lives, we tend to blame God. Things go wrong because actions have consequences. It may be the actions of others, as well as our own actions. Actions have consequences. No use blaming God. They had to learn that lesson. They brought it on themselves. And we need to recognize that we are in the wrong. And only when we recognize that we are in the wrong, that we've got it wrong, then God can come in and clean us up and the bridge can be made. A lesson we need to learn today. And that's the true nature of judgment and grace. The exile had a purpose. It broke the people away from all the evil that was destroying their quality life. They had to be brought to recognize that they'd got it wrong. Then God, with His grace, came in to restore and heal and take them forward. Here is a message for the people of God in the West today. We've got to start by recognizing we've got things wrong. We're worshipping what we do, our religious systems. And let's get back. Listen to what God is saying through His servants, the prophets. Go through a period of judgment, yes, because God's grace is always there for us. That is judgment, and that is grace. And after that tough presentation, we're going to move on to see the insights Ezekiel brings us from God about the damage that our rebellion can cause.